The Arizona sun hung low like a bleeding wound against the desert sky as Jesse Calhoun guided his weary horse through the sagebrush. Dust clung to his weathered face, and his dark eyes held the hollow look of a man who'd seen too much and lost even more. At 43, Jesse carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of regrets in his shoulders, each one adding another layer to the armor he'd built around his heart. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story now." The town of Tombstone lay 2 days behind him, and Jesse had no particular destination ahead. That's how he preferred it these days. No ties, no obligations, no one depending on him. The last time someone had counted on Jesse Calhoun, they'd ended up in a pine box, and he'd sworn never to let that happen again. As twilight painted the landscape in shades of purple and gold, Jesse spotted smoke rising from a small cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. His first instinct was to ride on. Other people's business was exactly that. But his horse was tired, and the promise of water for both of them was too tempting to ignore. The cabin looked abandoned at first glance. The wooden walls were weathered gray, and the porch sagged like an old man's back. But as Jesse dismounted and approached, he heard something that made him freeze. The soft sound of someone crying. "Hello?" Jesse called out, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 on his hip. "Anyone there?" The crying stopped abruptly. Jesse waited, listening to the desert wind whistle through the cottonwoods. Then, slowly, the cabin door creaked open, and a boy's face peered out. He couldn't have been more than 12, with sandy hair that hung in his eyes and clothes that had seen better days. But it was the look in those young eyes that hit Jesse like a punch to the gut, the same haunted expression he saw in his own reflection. "You ain't with them, are you?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "With who, son?" Jesse kept his voice gentle, the way he used to talk to his own boy. "Before, the men who've been watching the cabin. They come by every few days, just sitting out there on the ridge, staring." The boy stepped out onto the porch, and Jesse could see he was thin, too thin. "Name's Tommy Hatcher." Jesse nodded slowly. "Jesse Calhoun? Mind if I water my horse? Been riding hard all day?" Tommy hesitated, then pointed toward a well behind the cabin. "Help yourself. But mister, if you see riders coming, you best get out of here fast. They ain't the kind of men you want to meet." As Jesse led his horse to the well, he studied the boy more carefully. Tommy moved with the careful alertness of someone who'd learned to watch for danger, and there was something in his manner that spoke of secrets, the kind of secrets that got people killed. "You out here all alone, Tommy?" Jesse asked as he worked the pump handle. "Been taking care of myself just fine," Tommy replied, but there was a tremor in his voice that suggested otherwise. Jesse was about to respond when he heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Tommy's face went white as fresh snow. "They're coming," the boy whispered. "Oh God, they're really coming this time." Jesse looked toward the sound and saw them. 6 riders, silhouetted against the dying light, moving fast and purposeful. Even from a distance, he could see they carried torches, the flames dancing like demons in the gathering dusk. "Tommy? Who are these men? What do they want?" But the boy was already running toward the cabin. "Get inside. They can't see you here." Jesse grabbed his rifle from his saddle and followed Tommy into the cabin. The interior was sparse but clean, with a few personal belongings that suggested the boy had been living here for some time. Tommy was frantically gathering items from a wooden chest, his hands shaking. "Talk to me, son. What's this about?" Tommy looked up, tears streaming down his face. "They want to burn it down. They want to burn everything down, and they'll kill anyone who tries to stop them." "Why? What's so important about this old cabin?" Before Tommy could answer, a voice boomed from outside. "We know you're in there, boy. Come out now and we might let you walk away." Jesse peered through a crack in the shutters. The 6 riders had formed a semicircle around the cabin, their torches casting eerie shadows. The leader was a big man with a black beard and cold eyes that reflected the firelight like a snake's. "That's Silas Crane," Tommy whispered. "He's been hunting me for 3 weeks." "Hunting you? What for?" Tommy's young face crumpled. "Because of what I saw. Because of what I know about what they did to my pa." Jesse felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened to your father, Tommy?" "They murdered him. Right here in this cabin. And I was hiding in the root cellar, watching through the floorboards." Tommy's voice broke. "Pa made me promise to never tell anyone what I saw, but they know I was here. They know I'm the only witness." Outside, Crane's voice rang out again. "Last chance, boy. We're done playing games." Jesse checked his rifle and moved to the window. 6 against 1 weren't good odds, but he'd faced worse. What bothered him was the boy. Tommy was just a child, caught up in something that should have been handled by the law. "Why haven't you gone to the sheriff?" Jesse asked. Tommy let out a bitter laugh that sounded too old for his years. "Sheriff Morrison? He's the one who told them where to find me." The pieces were starting to come together, and Jesse didn't like the picture they were forming. Corruption, murder, and a boy who'd seen too much. It was the kind of situation he'd spent the last 5 years trying to avoid. But as he looked at Tommy's frightened face, Jesse felt something stir in his chest, something he'd thought was dead and buried. The boy needed help, and despite every instinct telling him to walk away, Jesse couldn't do it. "Tommy, I need you to tell me everything. What exactly did you see that night?" Before the boy could answer, the first torch came flying through the window. The torch crashed through the shutters in an explosion of glass and flame, landing on the wooden floor with a shower of sparks. Jesse dove forward, stamping out the fire while Tommy scrambled toward the back of the cabin. "Time's up!" Crane bellowed from outside. "Burn it down, boys!" More torches followed, and Jesse realized they weren't just trying to smoke them out. They were serious about destroying the cabin. Whatever secret this place held, Crane was willing to commit murder to keep it buried. "The root cellar!" Tommy shouted over the crackling flames. "There's a way out through the back!" Jesse grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him toward a trap door hidden beneath a worn rug. As they descended into the cramped space below, bullets began punching through the cabin walls above them. The Outlaws weren't taking any chances. The root cellar was dark and musty, filled with the earthy smell of stored vegetables and damp soil. Tommy led Jesse to the far end, where a narrow tunnel had been dug into the hillside. "Pa dug this during the Apache troubles," Tommy explained as they crawled through the passage. "Said a man always needed a back door." They emerged behind a cluster of boulders about 50 yards from the cabin, which was now fully engulfed in flames. The orange light danced across the faces of the 6 outlaws as they watched their handiwork, and Jesse could hear Crane shouting orders. "Check the ashes when it cools down. Make sure there ain't nothing left." Jesse pulled Tommy deeper into the shadows. "Now, talk. What did you see that night?" Tommy's voice was barely audible over the roar of the fire. "It was 3 weeks ago. Pa had been acting strange for days, like he was scared of something. Then that night, I heard voices outside. Pa told me to hide in the cellar no matter what happened." The boy's hands were shaking as he continued. "I watched through the gaps in the floorboards. Crane and his men came in, and they had someone with them. A man in a fancy suit. They were arguing about money, about some kind of deal gone wrong." "What kind of deal?" "Something about a mine. The man in the suit kept saying Pa had cheated him, that the assay reports were fake. Pa tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen." Tommy's voice cracked. "Crane shot him, just like that. Then they searched the cabin, looking for something." Jesse felt his jaw tighten. "Did they find what they were looking for?" Tommy shook his head. "Pa was too smart for that. He hid it where they'd never think to look." "Hid what, son?" Before Tommy could answer, they heard Crane's voice getting closer. "Spread out. They might have gotten out somehow. Check every rock, every bush." Jesse made a quick decision. "We need to move. Is there somewhere safe we can go?" "There's an old mine shaft about a mile north. Pa used to take me there when we went prospecting." Tommy looked back at the burning cabin, tears streaming down his face. "Everything's gone now." "Not everything," Jesse said firmly. "You're still alive, and that means there's still hope. They moved carefully through the darkness, using the scattered boulders and desert scrub for cover. Behind them, the cabin continued to burn, sending a pillar of smoke into the star-filled sky. Jesse could hear the outlaws searching, their voices carrying on the night wind. As they walked, Tommy continued his story. The man in the suit? I heard Crane call him Mr. Blackwood. He owns the Silver Creek Mining Company. Pa had been working for him, testing ore samples from different claims around Tombstone. Jesse nodded. He'd heard of Blackwood, a wealthy businessman from back east who'd been buying up mining claims throughout Arizona territory. What did your father find? That's just it. Pa discovered that Blackwood was salting the mines, making worthless claims look valuable by adding silver to the samples. He was selling them to investors for 10 times what they were worth. The pieces were falling into place. And your father had proof? Pa kept detailed records of every test he did. He had samples, documents, everything. When he realized what Blackwood was doing, he tried to back out of the deal. Tommy's voice hardened. That's when they killed him. They reached the mine shaft just as the moon emerged from behind a cloud, casting everything in silver light. The entrance was partially hidden by fallen rocks, but there was enough space to squeeze through. Inside, the air was cool and dry, with the metallic scent of old mining equipment. Tommy led Jesse deeper into the tunnel, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the place. About 100 feet in, he stopped at a wooden support beam and began feeling around its base. Pa taught me to always have a backup plan, Tommy said, pulling out a small metal box. He hid this here the day before he died. Jesse struck a match, and in its flickering light, they examined the contents of the box. There were official-looking documents, small bags of ore samples, and a leather journal filled with detailed notes in a careful hand. This is it, Tommy whispered. This is what they killed Pa for. Jesse studied one of the documents, an assay report that had clearly been altered. The original findings showed the ore was nearly worthless, but someone had changed the numbers to indicate a rich silver vein. Your father was an honest man, Jesse said. He was trying to do the right thing, and look where it got him. Tommy's voice was bitter. Dead, and his son running for his life. Jesse closed the box and looked at the boy. Tommy, this evidence could bring down Blackwood and his whole operation, but it's also going to make you the most wanted person in Arizona territory. I know. That's why I've been hiding. But I can't run forever, and I can't let them get away with murdering Pa. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of horses. Crane and his men were still searching, and it was only a matter of time before they found the mine. We need to get this evidence to someone we can trust, Jesse said. But not the local sheriff. If he's working with Blackwood, we'll be walking into a trap. Tommy nodded. There's a federal marshal in Tucson. Pa mentioned him once, said he was one of the few honest lawmen left in the territory. Tucson's 3 days' ride from here. Can you make it? With you helping me, I can. Jesse felt that familiar stirring in his chest again, the feeling he'd been trying to bury for 5 years. This boy needed him, and despite all his promises to stay uninvolved, he couldn't turn his back. All right, son, we'll get this evidence to Tucson, but first, we need to survive the night. As if summoned by his words, they heard the sound of boots on gravel outside the mine entrance. Crane had found them. Well, well, Crane's voice echoed from the mine entrance, dripping with satisfaction. Looks like our little rabbit found himself a burrow. Jesse motioned for Tommy to stay quiet and pressed himself against the tunnel wall. In the darkness, he could hear multiple sets of footsteps, at least 3 men, maybe 4. Crane wasn't taking any chances this time. I know you're in there, boy, Crane called out. And whoever's helping you better think real careful about what side of this they want to be on. Mr. Blackwood's got a long reach and a longer memory. Jesse checked his rifle and counted his ammunition. 18 rounds, plus the 6 in his Colt. Against 4 or more men in a confined space, it wasn't much. But he'd learned long ago that in situations like this, it wasn't about the odds. It was about making every shot count. Tommy, he whispered, is there another way out of here? The boy shook his head. This shaft dead ends about 50 feet back. Pa and I explored every inch of it. Jesse cursed silently. They were trapped. and Crane knew it. But maybe that could work to their advantage. In the narrow confines of the mine, the outlaws couldn't use their superior numbers effectively. "Listen up," Crane shouted. "I'm going to make this real simple. Send the boy out, and the rest of you can walk away. Keep him, and you all die in that hole." Jesse made his decision. "Tommy, take that evidence and get as far back in the tunnel as you can. Whatever happens, don't come out until you're sure it's safe." "What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done 5 years ago," Jesse replied grimly. "Stand and fight." He moved toward the entrance, using the support beams for cover. The outlaws had lit torches, and their flickering light created dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. Jesse could see 2 men just inside the entrance, with more waiting outside. "Last chance!" Crane bellowed. "Send out the boy!" Jesse's response was a rifle shot that took down the first outlaw before the man even knew he was there. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and the remaining outlaws scrambled for cover. "Kill them all!" Crane roared from outside. "Bring me that boy's body!" The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. In the narrow tunnel, every shot echoed like thunder, and the air quickly filled with gun smoke. Jesse used his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, moving from beam to beam, making himself a difficult target. The second outlaw tried to rush his position, but walked straight into Jesse's Colt. The man dropped with a grunt, his torch clattering to the ground and casting wild shadows as it rolled. But Jesse's advantage was temporary. More men were coming, and his ammunition was running low. He needed a new strategy, and he needed it fast. That's when he remembered something from his cavalry days. Sometimes the best defense was a good offense. "Tommy," he called back into the tunnel, "when I say run, you head for that back wall and stay down." Jesse gathered the fallen outlaw's weapons and ammunition, then positioned himself near a support beam that looked particularly unstable. If he could bring down part of the tunnel, he might be able to create enough confusion to turn the tables. "Run!" he shouted to Tommy, then put 3 quick shots into the wooden beam. The old timber groaned and cracked, then gave way with a thunderous crash. Rocks and debris rained down, partially blocking the tunnel and trapping one of Crane's men beneath the rubble. In the chaos that followed, Jesse made his move. He charged through the dust and smoke, catching the remaining outlaws off guard. His rifle spoke twice more, and suddenly the tunnel was quiet, except for the settling of disturbed rock. Jesse emerged from the mine to find Crane waiting for him, gun drawn and fury written across his face. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, stranger," Crane snarled. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" "A murderer and a coward," Jesse replied calmly. "That about cover it?" Crane's face twisted with rage. "Blackwood owns this territory. Every sheriff, every judge, every politician from here to Phoenix. You think killing a few of my boys is going to change anything? Maybe not, but it's a start." The 2 men faced each other in the moonlight, hands hovering over their guns. Jesse had been in more gunfights than he cared to remember, and he could read Crane like an open book. The man was fast, but he was also angry, and anger made people sloppy. "You should have minded your own business," Crane said, his hand starting to move. Jesse's Colt cleared leather first, the shot echoing across the desert. Crane staggered backward, looking down at the spreading red stain on his shirt with surprise. "How?" he gasped. "Practice," Jesse replied simply. Crane fell to his knees, then toppled forward into the dust. Jesse stood over him for a moment, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret. It was just another death in a territory that had seen too many. "Tommy," he called back toward the mine. "It's over! You can come out!" The boy emerged from the tunnel, clutching the metal box to his chest. His face was pale but determined, and Jesse could see a new resolve in his eyes. "Is he dead?" Tommy asked, looking at Crane's body. "Yes, but this isn't over, son. Crane was just Blackwood's hired gun. The real enemy is still out there." Tommy nodded. "Then we better get to Tucson fast, before Blackwood sends more men." Jesse looked around at the bodies scattered in the moonlight. "He'll send them anyway once word gets back to him, but maybe we can stay ahead of them long enough to get that evidence to the marshal." As they gathered supplies from the outlaws' horses, Tommy spoke up. "Mr. Calhoun, Why did you help me? You could have just ridden away. Jesse paused in his work, considering the question. I had a son once, about your age. I wasn't there when he needed me most, and I've regretted it every day since. What happened to him? That's a story for another time, son. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you alive long enough to see justice done. They mounted up and rode north toward Tucson, the desert wind carrying away the smoke from the burned cabin. Behind them, the evidence of their battle lay scattered in the moonlight, a testament to the price of standing up to corruption and greed. But Jesse knew this was just the beginning. Blackwood had money, power, and influence. Getting to Tucson alive would be the easy part. The real challenge would be convincing anyone to take on one of the most powerful men in Arizona territory. As they rode through the night, Jesse couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere out there, other eyes were following their progress, and other guns were being loaded. The hunt was far from over. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with shades of pink and gold when Jesse and Tommy finally saw the adobe buildings of Tucson rising from the desert floor. They'd ridden hard through the night, stopping only to rest their horses and check their back trail. So far, there was no sign of pursuit. But Jesse knew that wouldn't last long. There it is, Tommy said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Think we made it? Jesse studied the town through his field glasses. Tucson was bigger than Tombstone, with more places to hide, but also more places for enemies to lurk. We're not safe yet, son. Blackwood's got money, and money talks loud in places like this. They approached the town carefully, taking side streets and avoiding the main thoroughfares. Jesse had learned long ago that the best way to stay alive was to assume everyone was a potential threat until proven otherwise. The federal marshal's office was located in a sturdy brick building near the center of town. A sign outside read, U.S. Marshal William Hayes, Arizona Territory. Jesse had heard the name before. Hayes had a reputation as an honest lawman in a territory where such men were increasingly rare. Wait here with the horses, Jesse told Tommy. Let me go in first and feel things out. The marshal's office was spartanly furnished but clean, with wanted posters covering one wall and a gun rack holding several rifles. Behind a wooden desk sat a man in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He looked up as Jesse entered, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun on his hip. Help you? Hayes asked, his voice neutral but wary. Marshal Hayes? Name's Jesse Calhoun. I've got a boy outside with some information you need to see. Information about murder and fraud involving the Silver Creek Mining Company. Hayes's expression didn't change, but Jesse caught a flicker of interest in his eyes. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Calhoun. You got proof to back it up? More than you might expect. But first I need to know, can we trust you? The local law in Tombstone is compromised. Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Jesse carefully. I've been tracking irregularities in mining claims for months. If you've got evidence of fraud, I'm listening. Something in the marshal's tone convinced Jesse he was genuine. Tommy, come on in. The boy entered carrying the metal box, his young face set with determination. Hayes's expression softened slightly when he saw how young Tommy was. This is Tommy Hatcher, Jesse explained. His father was murdered 3 weeks ago for trying to expose a fraud scheme. Tommy witnessed the killing. Hayes gestured to chairs in front of his desk. Sit down, both of you. Start from the beginning. For the next hour, Tommy told his story, while Jesse provided additional details about their encounter with Crane and his men. Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but never taking his eyes off Tommy's face. When Tommy finished, Hayes opened the metal box and examined its contents. His expression grew darker as he studied the altered assay reports and read through the detailed journal. This is substantial evidence, Hayes said finally. Your father was a thorough man, son. These records could bring down Blackwood's entire operation. Will it be enough to get justice for Pa? Tommy asked. Hayes nodded slowly. More than enough, but getting Blackwood to trial is going to be the challenge. He's got friends in high places, and they're not going to want this coming to light. What do you need from us? Jesse asked. I need Tommy's testimony, and I need these documents authenticated by an independent assayer. There's a man in Phoenix who can—" The marshal's words were cut off by the sound of horses outside. Jesse moved to the window and cursed under his breath. 6 riders had just pulled up in front of the office, and he recognized the leader immediately. "Blackwood," he said grimly. Hayes stood up, checking his weapons. "How did he find us so fast?" "Money talks," Jesse replied. "Someone in town must have sent word." The front door opened, and a well-dressed man in his 50s entered, flanked by 2 armed guards. Charles Blackwood was smaller than Jesse had expected, but there was something in his cold, gray eyes that spoke of ruthless determination. "Marshal Hayes," Blackwood said smoothly, "I understand you have something that belongs to me." "The only thing I have is evidence of your crimes, Blackwood," Hayes replied. "You're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder." Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Marshal. I have a federal warrant here for the arrest of Jesse Calhoun and Tommy Hatcher on charges of murder and theft." He produced a document from his coat. Hayes examined it, his face growing grim. "This warrant was issued in Phoenix yesterday," Hayes said. "How is that possible?" "I have friends in the territorial government," Blackwood replied. "Friends who understand the importance of maintaining order and protecting legitimate business interests." Jesse felt his hand moving toward his gun, but Hayes caught his eye and shook his head slightly. The marshal was thinking, looking for an angle. "Even if this warrant is legitimate," Hayes said, "I still have jurisdiction here, and I have evidence of serious federal crimes." "Evidence obtained illegally by a known outlaw and a runaway boy," Blackwood countered. "Evidence that would never stand up in court." Tommy suddenly spoke up, his young voice cutting through the tension. "You killed my father." Blackwood turned his cold gaze on the boy. "Your father was a thief who tried to steal from me. What happened to him was unfortunate but necessary." He was trying to stop you from cheating people." "He was trying to destroy a legitimate business enterprise," Blackwood replied. "But that's all academic now. You're coming with me, boy, both of you." Jesse had heard enough. "The only place we're going is to a federal courthouse." Blackwood smiled. "I'm afraid that's not an option. You see, there was a terrible accident on the way to Phoenix. Outlaws attacked the prisoner transport. Sadly, there were no survivors. The threat was clear, and Jesse could see that Blackwood meant every word. But before anyone could move, Hayes spoke up. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, there's something you should know. While you were talking, I was sending a telegraph to the territorial governor. Seems he's very interested in your mining operations, especially after receiving a detailed report about your activities." Blackwood's confident expression faltered. "What report?" Hayes smiled grimly. "The one I sent yesterday, along with copies of all the evidence. You see, I've been investigating you for months. Tommy's testimony just gave me the final piece I needed." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Why don't you check with your friends in Phoenix? I think you'll find their enthusiasm for protecting you has suddenly cooled." Blackwood's face went white as the implications sank in. Without his political protection, he was just another criminal facing federal charges. "It's over, Blackwood," Jesse said. "Your hired guns are dead, your scheme is exposed, and now everyone knows what you really are." The mining magnate looked around the room, seeing his empire crumbling before his eyes. His guards were shifting nervously, clearly having second thoughts about their loyalty. "Marshal Hayes," Blackwood said finally, his voice defeated, "I believe we can reach an accommodation." "The only accommodation you're getting is a fair trial," Hayes replied. "Guards, you can walk away now or face charges as accessories. Your choice." The 2 men looked at each other, then slowly backed toward the door. They'd been hired to intimidate witnesses, not face federal murder charges. As the sun climbed higher over Tucson, Charles Blackwood found himself in shackles, his empire in ruins and his future in the hands of a federal court. Tommy Hatcher stood beside Jesse Calhoun, no longer a frightened boy running from killers, but a young man who'd seen justice done for his father. "What happens now?" Tommy asked as they watched Blackwood being led away. Jesse put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Now you get to decide what kind of man you want to become. Your father would be proud of you, son." Tommy looked up at the man who'd risked everything to help him. "What about you, Mr. Calhoun? What will you do now?" Jesse considered the question. For 5 years, he'd been running from his past, convinced he was better off alone. But this boy had shown him something he'd forgotten, that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you fought for other people. "Well," Jesse said with a smile, "I reckon I could use a partner. Someone to help me make sure there are fewer Charles Blackwoods in this world. You interested?" Tommy's face lit up with the first genuine smile Jesse had seen from him. "Yes, sir. I'd like that very much." As they walked out into the Arizona sunshine, Jesse felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The lonely cowboy had found something worth fighting for, and the orphaned boy had found a family. Sometimes, in the harsh landscape of the frontier, the most unlikely partnerships could bloom into something beautiful. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they'd face them together. And in a territory where justice was often hard to find, Jesse Calhoun and Tommy Hatcher would make sure it had a fighting chance. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new, amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.